On this week's prequel episode, we follow up on our Catherine Called Birdy listener polls, learn about historical fiction, and preview the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It's another prequel episode. We have every segment, so we'll get right into it with our patron shoutouts.
I put up with you because your father and mother were our finest patrons, that's why.
No new patrons this week, but we do have our Academy Award winners, and they are Vic Vicious, Matilde, Steve from Arizona, Paul, Jeff Niederhofer, Teresa Schwartz, Ian from Wine Country, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby Says Air Elemental Cycle, Book 4 is out now, That Darn Skag, V. Frank, and Alina Starkov. Thank you all very much for continuing to support us. We love you. You're the best. Katie, let's see what people had to say about Catherine Called Birdy.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, on Patreon, we had 1 vote for the book, 0 for the movie. Matilde said, an easy choice this week. The book was original and made me laugh out loud more often than I expected. I would have loved it had I read it as a kid, but even as an adult, I liked it a lot and found it entertaining. The movie is an adequate adaptation, but it's also very basic. I found Lena to be a very bland filmmaker overall. The cinematography was nothing interesting, and the music was annoyingly distracting. Bella and Andrew were great, and their performances elevated the movie. I have a feeling it's all to their credit and not the directions. So yeah, voted for the book without a second thought.
I don't disagree necessarily with any of that. I think I agree that the direction of the film was pretty bland, pretty straightforward. I think it works mostly because, well, I don't know. You can still, even with kind of what the movie is doing, I think there could have been some maybe more creative choices made in the visual storytelling. It's very serviceable. There's definitely nothing like inventive camera wise or shot wise. It's all kind of just, what you would expect. Again, I think it works for what the story's doing. It didn't stick out to me as particularly like bad or like overly bland, but it is also nothing. There is nothing like there. I was never excited at any of the cinematography in this movie. So yeah, it is, what it is, which falls as much on the cinematographer as it does the director. There's partnership going on there for sure. That being said, I do think I agree the performances are great. I think you have to give some of that credit to the director personally. I think it would be a mistake to say a lot of it falls on the actor, maybe even the vast majority of it. But the director does play a large role, especially in film. The director plays a large role in kind of coaxing those performances out. And it wouldn't surprise me. I think that's maybe what Lena Dunham is probably best at. Like, if I had to guess, because I think that she seems most talented to me as kind of, from the little I've seen of her work, of like kind of understanding emotionally where characters need to be, where they need to be in a given scene, and kind of, I think in this movie everybody was kind of acting from a place that felt very real to what their characters were going through. And I think that, again, a lot of that obviously falls on the actors, but I think there's some due credit given to the director in that regard, because yes, I would agree that what we're getting from the direction in this film, well, I guess I'll say this: if she's not responsible for the performances in any large part in this film, then I would agree there's not much to write home about, because apart from that, I don't know, maybe she runs a very tight ship on set. There's a million responsibilities that fall on director, so I have no idea. And a lot of them you don't really see in the final product necessarily. There's a lot of moving parts that go on with directing. But anyways, yeah, I would agree nothing blew me away about what was done in this film from a direction standpoint. Other than maybe the performances, and again, it's hard to know how much of that falls on the actors versus the director. And I guess in this instance, we do have a little bit of that, because we do have a little bit of background knowledge, because we know Bella Ramsey is great in other stuff. We know Andrew Scott is great in other stuff. We know Billy Piper can be really good in other stuff. So like our main performances are all people we know can be great in other stuff. So I think it is fair to at least be like, we're not taking like some some sitcom star and turning them into like this deeply gravitas, like having them turn in this deep performance full of gravitas or anything like that. These are all, established actors that know what they're doing. But although at this time, I will say Bella Ramsey at this point, first feature film, hadn't done Last of Us, had been in Game of Thrones a couple years before this when they were significantly younger. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, I again, not to just repeat myself, but it is, there's nothing really superb to write home about from a direction standpoint. So I would agree with that.
Yeah. Over on Facebook, we had 2 votes for the book and 1 for the movie. Luciana said, voting for the movie since I haven't read the book. I went in not knowing anything, and so with super low expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised. Bella Ramsey is a delight to watch, and while not perfect, the movie was fun overall.
That is a very apt review, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That is kind of my exact feelings on the film.
Yeah. No, it doesn't surprise me to hear that, like, not having read the book, you would maybe enjoy the movie a bit more.
Yeah, but because that was my experience, obviously. And again, I enjoyed the movie. Didn't blow me away in any regards. Wasn't like, wow, that was amazing. Wasn't like incredible. But yeah, it was like, yeah, that was fun. That was a nice story, well crafted, done well. Because it was funny, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but going in, when I looked at the IMDb reviews, the score was like a 6.3 or whatever. And I was like, I wonder if this is going to be one of those things where it's like, but it had pretty good critical reviews, like in the 80s or 90s or whatever. Or on Rotten Tomatoes, it was like in the 80s or 90s. And I remember thinking, like, I wonder if this is going to be one of those things where the IMDb reviews are like all like 9 and 10 star reviews, and then like a bunch of like trolls because it's Lena Dunham, because it's like a feminism kind of message.
Yeah.
Like, do we have a bunch of like shitty people going in and like review bombing? And when I actually looked, because the IMDb, you can click and look and see how the reviews break down. And that really wasn't the case. There were, disproportionate number of 1-star reviews, but that wasn't, you could tell it wasn't one of those situations where it was like all 8, 9, and 10 stars and then a bunch of 1 stars that like averaged it out to 6. The vast majority, the median score was like a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
And I think I would agree with that. Like, if I was rating the movie, I think I would give it like a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Yeah,
something
that
in that
seems
ballpark.
fair.
Maybe a 7. Like, maybe, yeah. But yeah, nothing that blows you away, but it's very serviceable, enjoyable film.
Over on Twitter, we had 2 votes for the book and 1 for the movie. Kelly Napier said, I don't think I've disagreed with y'all this many times in a row before. I went with the movie. I know that I read this book as a kid, but I don't remember reading it. On this reread, I found myself incredibly bored and having to force myself to get to the end of each month. I could not disagree more. What I liked about the story was the idea that kids should try and keep their whimsy as long as possible and not grow up too quickly, even if society is trying to force them to. It's something I hope all 3 of my kids take to heart. Stay young at heart as long as you can.
I will say I don't. There's definitely, just coming up from it, having only watched the movie, that wasn't like the main takeaway I got from the movie. I'm not saying that Kelly said it's the main takeaway. They said that's what they liked about the story. But yeah, I could see what they're saying. There's definitely that. There's definitely a big element in the story of Birdy not sort of,
not wanting to
not growing up
and
and the movie kind of, I don't want to say celebrating that, but like validating that and validating kind of keeping what makes her quirky and what makes her Birdy or whatever. Which, yeah, I agree, is a good message.
Yeah. We didn't have any comments on Instagram, but we did have some votes. We had 3 for the book and 1 for the movie. So our winner at the end was the book, despite more of our comments being for the movie, with 8 votes to the movie's 3.
There you go.
But we're not done with our feedback yet,
yes.
Because we have a super special bonus follow-up to Allegiant. So if you listened to the last prequel episode,
prequel before for Catherine
the prequel,
Birdy,
the prequel before this prequel, where we were following up on our Allegiant episode, I mentioned that it had looked like we had an additional comment on Goodreads, but then I couldn't actually see the comment.
Yes.
Well, we got a message on Goodreads after that episode aired from Eric. And Eric said, "Hey there. Sorry for the confusion regarding my comment on your Allegiant post. I kind of second-guessed myself and couldn't figure out how to edit it, so I just deleted the comment."
Relatable.
Yes, relatable content. Basically, I said, I'm a long-time listener, and I listen even if I haven't read the book or seen the movie, and it's never been an issue before. But for this series, I was lost. We were also lost. So other than the two main characters, I couldn't remember who anyone was. They seemed to die and the new ones would pop up all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. All the similar sounding words for specific groups, erudite, allegiant, abnegation. I was pretty lost.
That's
yeah. Yeah. And I was glad to hear that you guys were a little lost too. But with my original comment, I just didn't want you guys to think I was insulting your storytelling abilities or something. Because again, I've never had this issue before. I think it seems like just a kind of confusing mush of a series. That is a great description of the divergence here. Confusing mush of a series pretty much sums it up.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. Anyway, big fan. Y'all are the only podcast I listen to. Thanks for your hard work.
The only podcast? Wow, I feel just
I'm honored.
That is wild. I don't know a single person who listens to podcasts who only listens to one. I mean, maybe I do and I just don't know it, but that's wild to me. Because I listen to dozens of podcasts, but that is it. You don't really listen to podcasts.
I listen to no podcasts.
Yeah, so you don't listen to
I can't focus on them.
Yeah.
I have a hard time staying focused on it.
And I also, which is part of, it's fun. I don't know, not to get into a whole separate argument. It's okay if you don't focus. You're allowed to listen to them and not.
No, but it bothers me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because there are definitely some that I listen to more intently that I want to make sure I'm able to concentrate on. And then others that I'm not as worried about, how specifically I'm able to listen to.
No, it just for me, it just becomes frustrating. So I just don't really do it.
That's fair.
Anyway, thank you for following up, Eric. We appreciate it. Appreciate your comments.
And again, thank you. What an honor. What an honor to be the only podcast you listen to. All right, that is all of our feedback. But now we do have a learning things segment. It's time to learn a little bit about historical fiction.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Okay, so we have done historical fiction before. Our last book was also historical fiction, but I realized I don't think we've ever talked about it as its own genre, so I thought that might be interesting. So historical fiction is a literary genre in which the plot takes place in a setting related to past events, but it is fictional.
Right.
So although the term is commonly used as a synonym for historical fiction literature, like books, that can also be applied to other kinds of narratives, theater, opera, cinema, television, video games, graphic novels, basically anything where you're telling a story, this can apply. An important element of historical fiction is that it pays attention to the social norms, the manners of the era, the social conditions, and other details of the depicted period. So, you're not always necessarily striving for 100% historical accuracy, but you are trying to evoke this mood.
Trying to capture
you're trying to capture the vibe of the era, whatever it may be. Authors also sometimes might choose to explore notable historical figures through historical fiction. I mentioned briefly in the last episode the Royal Diaries series that was popular when I was a kid, and that would be an example of that. Basically, diaries exploring the lives of royal young girls from the past. Fictional diaries. But you have a fictional diary written by Queen Elizabeth when she was a princess, that kind of thing. Some subgenres such as alternate history or historical fantasy sometimes will intentionally insert ahistorical or speculative elements into a historical fiction piece. Historical fiction can also blend with other genres, for example, romance, mystery, horror, or even biography.
I would say it almost usually does.
Yes.
Like usually it does kind of cross into some other
Yeah.
genre. Not always, obviously, but very common.
So I thought this was interesting. Definitions differ as to what constitutes.
Wait, real quick. Sorry. You have biography on there. Can historical fiction be biographical? Isn't that contradictory by nature?
I would argue that even the diary examples that we were just talking about constitutes a blend with biography.
Oh,
because
okay.
you're approaching the fiction from the stance of like, I'm writing about this person's life, right?
Right. Yeah. So would, in that instance, Catherine called Birdy kind of be a biographical historical fiction?
Yeah, I would say.
Okay.
I would say so.
Okay.
Obviously about a
made up person.
totally fictional person,
Yes.
but yeah. So I thought this was interesting. Definitions differ as to what constitutes a piece of work as quote unquote historical. So on the one hand, we have the Historical Novel Society, which defines
seems like experts. Subject matter experts.
And they define the genre as works, quote, written at least 50 years after the events described.
Interesting.
While critic Sarah Johnson delineates such novels as, quote, set before the middle of the last 20th of the last century.
And in this instance, that would be 20th.
But in this instance, yeah, that would be the 20th.
Right.
In which the author is writing from research rather than personal experience. And then Linda Adamson, and her preference to the reference work World Historical Fiction, she defines it as a novel about a time period at least 25 years before it was written. So we have some kind of some varying definitions here.
But they all kind of converge on the idea that it can't be historical fiction is not like, so the year right now is 2023 when we're recording this. Historical fiction would not be you writing about the events that took place in like 2015. That would not fall under historical fiction.
Yeah.
Under their definitions, at least.
And I think like there's some disagreement on like, well, how long ago do you need to be writing about?
Yeah, clearly all three of these provide a different,
in order for this to be historical fiction. Like for me, I would consider anything outside of like the author's lifetime to be historical fiction. Like that's how I personally would define it.
Makes the most sense to me that if you're writing either outside of your lifetime and I may even go a little further and say like maybe outside of like your like one generation removed or something, only because like if I was I would even say because if I was writing about like the 70s, I would say that's historical fiction.
Like I'm saying, like I could write something that's set in, say, the late 90s or early 2000s. Yeah. And now, as per
all three of them,
Linda Adamson, at least 25 years. Like if I went back far enough, technically count, she would consider that historical fiction. Right. But I personally wouldn't because I remember that time.
Yes, and the other two people
I was there, Gandalf.
No, I would agree with that. I think that actually your definition there that I don't know if you came up with it, but I think that actually maybe of the three that we've or not definition, but of the three kind of category, rules, time delineations we've been given for what categorizes historical fiction, I think outside of your lifetime, the author's lifetime makes the most sense. Of the three,
to me that makes the most sense. Like if I wrote a book set in like the early 80s, I would have to write primarily from research. I couldn't write at all from like personal experience or memory. Right. Or like the vibe that I remember from that time.
For sure, yeah. No, I would agree. I think that that makes the most sense to me of all these definitions, because otherwise it seems as soon as you got to go into research and it's not something you experienced, it feels like you're going into historical.
Yes.
I think that makes sense.
So, although this can sometimes feel like kind of a modern genre, or at least it does to me, historical fiction actually has a very long tradition in world literature.
Oh yeah.
3 of the 4 classics of Chinese literature are set in the distant past. Classical Greek novelists, also very fond of writing novels about people and places of the past. The Iliad even has been described as historical fiction because it does treat historic events. Shakespeare's histories also considered historical fiction. They're also propaganda, but that's a learning things segment for another day.
Yeah.
In other words, people have been telling stories about something that happened a long time ago for a very long time.
Yes.
But historical fiction as a distinct publishing genre started to rise to prominence in Europe during like the early 19th century as part of the romantic reaction to the Enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment was like very forward looking. And when we got burned out on that, we said, okay, let's start looking back instead. And that was especially due to the influence of Scottish writer Sir Walter Scott. His works were immensely popular throughout Europe at the time. Other authors whose names you might recognize that wrote historical fiction in the 19th century include Charles Dickens, James Fenimore Cooper, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Leo Tolstoy.
I think I've read something from each of them in my lifetime, or at least works
I
from
think
each of them.
I have at least read excerpts from each of these.
I don't know about Dumas. Maybe, I think. But yeah, I know I've read Hugo, I've read Hawthorne, I've read Cooper, and I've read Dickens. And I'm pretty sure I read Tolstoy in high school or college. But anyways.
And historical fiction has only continued to grow in popularity. It's grown kind of alongside the modern publishing industry. A few popular works of historical fiction from more recently include like the Outlander series, which obviously incorporates like elements of fantasy. Philippa Gregory's Tudor novels. The Girl
Is
with
that what the Tudor TV show is based on? Do you know?
I am not sure. Maybe.
Okay.
She wrote like The Other Boleyn Girl.
Which that's a movie.
Yeah,
it?
that's a movie. And what is the name of her other big one? I want to say The White Queen, but I don't know for sure that that's right. Yeah, she wrote like a bunch of novels like set in that general era of like the heyday of the Tudors.
Yeah, interesting. I was trying to find it because I watched. It's been a long time, but I remember watching at least like the first season of the Tudors. I just wondering. I was thinking maybe it was based on her novels, but I wasn't. I Google searched for 8 seconds and was not able to figure it out, so I gave up. But
other examples include The Girl with the Pearl Earring, Memoirs of a Geisha, reimaginings of Jane Austen's works like Longbourn and Death Comes to Pemberley. I feel fall under the definition of historical fiction.
And you're talking about this is all literary.
Yes. Do you have examples from other
Well,
genres?
Memoirs of a Geisha was adapted into a film.
As was The Girl with the Pearl Earring.
Yeah, I mean, one that just jumped to my head because of Memoirs of a Geisha, that was a film that we did, The Handmaiden.
Yes, also historical fiction.
And
both
dozens
versions
of others.
Of it.
Yeah, I'm sure tons of other stuff we've done would count. Or maybe not tons, but there's
And it is interesting. I think it's one of those things that is so common that we almost don't think about it. Then when you start thinking about it, that's like everything.
Yeah. No, historical fiction is definitely one of those genres where it is like, it's like one of those broader,
it's very broad
genres that is like,
and then it like
stuff
filters down through lots of different things.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next little point here. It's easy for the definition of historical fiction to become blurry. I think there's a general tendency to not think of older historical fiction as historical fiction because it's all old.
Right.
And then we add to that like some disagreement about what actually counts as quote unquote historical, and then all of our like blending and incorporating of other genres, and even sometimes including fantastical elements. And you get kind of very fluid parameters for this.
Like all genre.
Yes. I do think that one of the most important things to remember about historical fiction, though, is that you are still reading fiction.
Yes.
No matter how well researched, it is still fiction.
It's the reason it's called fiction and not nonfiction. Because Made up. All right. Speaking of historical fiction, that's what we're doing, obviously. Duh. That's the whole point. Why else would we be talking about it? So let's learn now a little bit more about the historical work of fiction, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, the book.
Miss Ashton,
Yes,
have you always wanted to be a writer?
it's a perfect job. Sitting indoors and always near a teapot.
Dear Miss Ashton, my name is Dorsey Adams.
I am part of a book club, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society.
You did that beautifully.
It brought us together during the occupation.
Juliet, you cannot go to a book club meeting on the island of Guernsey.
What reading did for these people. Finally, I'll have something serious to write.
Can't imagine Mark would let you get very far anyway.
It's English Channel, not the China Seas.
Dear Mr. Adams, I so hope that you might allow me to come and meet your society.
So happy to make your acquaintance.
Dorsey!
Hello.
Hello.
You painted such a vivid story in your letters. It's so compelling.
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is a historical novel with a very long title.
Yeah, just clunkiest.
Yes, co-written by American authors Mary Ann Schaeffer and Annie Barrows. The book is set in 1946. This is a World War II novel, and it is an epistolary novel. So we have two of those back to back, although this one is not a diary. It is composed of letters written from one character to another. So the primary author of this work, Mary Ann Schaeffer, had planned to write a biography of Kathleen Scott, who was the wife of the English polar explorer Robert Falcon Scott.
Okay.
But while researching that subject, she traveled to Cambridge, but she was discouraged to find that Scott's personal papers were like nearly unusable. Like I guess they just hadn't been preserved well or something. And in the midst of this frustration, she decided to spend some of her trip instead visiting Guernsey in the Channel Islands. However, when she arrived there, the airport immediately got shut down due to heavy fog, so she spent most of her visit in the airport's bookshop reading histories of the German occupation of the islands during World War II, which sparked the idea in her for this novel.
Yeah.
However, it would be like another 20 years before she started to write anything about Guernsey. And then after the manuscript had been accepted for publication in 2006, the book's editor requested some changes that were going to require like substantial rewrites. However, around that time, her health had begun to deteriorate. She would eventually pass in 2008. So she had asked her niece, Annie Barrows, co-author, who was already an established author of children's literature, to finish the editing and the rewriting of her original novel.
Okay. I did see that there were two women credited as the
Yes.
authors, and I didn't realize why. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so Barrows did that, and she is credited as the co-author of the novel. So Schaeffer wrote like most of it.
Yeah.
And then Barrows went back and did like the editing and the rewriting that was necessary for publication.
Yep.
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society reached number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list for paperback in August of 2009, after it had been on the list for 11 weeks. So it had a slow climb. A couple review quotes. Stevie Davies, writing for The Guardian, said, quote, "Schaeffer's Guernsey characters step from the past, radiant with eccentricity and kindly humor, a comic version of the state of grace."
Good Lord. I'm sorry, that sentence, I'm not a fan of the style, the prose there, personally.
They are innocents who have seen and suffered without allowing evil to penetrate the rind of decency that guards their humanity.
Okay. Stevie.
Take it up
Davis,
with Stevie.
writing for The Guardian. Look, I am not opposed to some
flowery prose.
but there's something about that specific style that just does not, I find very grating. I don't know what it is. I just find it incredibly grating. Anyways, sorry.
Publishers Weekly said of the book, quote, "The occasionally contrived letters jump from incident to incident, including the formation of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, while Guernsey was under German occupation, and person to person in a manner that feels disjointed. But Juliet's quips are so clever, the Guernsey inhabitants so enchanting, and the small acts of heroism so vivid and moving that one forgives the authors for not being able to settle on a single person or plot." And our last quote here, Kirkus Reviews said of the book, quote, "Elizabeth and Juliet are appealingly reminiscent of game but gutsy 40s movie heroines. The engrossing subject matter and lively writing make this a sure winner, perhaps fodder for a TV series."
Little did they know.
Which makes me very interested to see if I think that this book would be better adapted for TV than a movie. We'll find out.
I guess we will see. Well, what we got was a movie, so let's learn a little bit about it.
You are not what I expected.
How did you imagine me, Mr. Adams?
Juliet!
Ah. My life's in London. There's nothing to keep you here. We'll still write to each other, won't we?
Yes, of course. Is my mistake bringing you back too quickly?
I'm afraid.
I've seen you reach for what you want. You have that courage.
If books do have the power to bring people together, this one may work its magic.
Do you suppose it's possible for us to already belong to someone before we've met them? If so, I belong to the spirit I found among you on Guernsey.
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society is a 2018 film directed by Mike Newell, who did 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and most notably to maybe our listeners, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Donnie Brasco, and Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, among others. It was written by Don Roos, who did The Opposite of Sex and Happy Endings, Kevin Hood, who did Becoming Jane and A Royal Night Out, and Thomas Bazooka, I assume that's how his name is, Bezucha. Bazooka. I don't know how else I would say it.
Could be Bazoocha, I guess.
Yeah, maybe, I guess. I think it's Bazooka, but who wrote Let Him Go, Big Eden, and The Family Stone. The film stars Lily James, Michael Huisman, Glenn Powell, Jessica Brown Findlay, or Findlay. I actually never know. I always read it in my head as Findlay, but I'm sure it's just Findlay. Catherine Parkinson, Matthew Good, Tom Courtney, Penelope Wilton, Bronal Gallagher, and Kit Connor. The film has an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 65 on Metacritic, and a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb. It made $23 million against a supposed budget of $85 million. I was only able to confirm that $85 million in one place, so I'm not 100% positive. That seems like a really high budget.
That's rough.
It's a huge budget for a movie like this, because I also believe, I don't know, that seems, I don't want to say it's a huge budget. That's a pretty big budget for a movie of this. I would think this would be more like a 30 to 50 million, but who knows? There's not huge stars. I wouldn't imagine there's a ton of special effects and stuff. Like, it just doesn't strike me as a movie that would be super expensive, but I could be wrong. And again, this was not on that budget was not on Wikipedia. I did some searching and found some production website that supposedly had the budget. It doesn't surprise me that it would have lost money, mainly because who had ever heard of this? But I say that, I know people had it, and it was a New York Times bestseller, but it's like a very niche audience,
Yeah, it's a little more
audience.
Niche than some of the other stuff that we do.
And you're not going to get much wide-ranging appeal with the title of your movie being the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Like, you're just not going to draw in a lot of general audiences.
It is interesting to me, because I don't even mind that title for a book.
Yeah.
Especially like a historical fiction where who you're selling this to.
Right.
But it is interesting to me that they didn't even attempt to change it for the movie.
I was thinking about that, and I wasn't able to find anything about why they didn't. I actually didn't like look for that specifically, but I didn't see anything about why they didn't change the title. Because I was thinking about the same thing. I was like, why would you use that title? And the only thing I can think is that it was a New York Times bestseller.
Mm-hmm.
So there is at least some audience built in. Now, New York Times bestseller can mean a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that this book was like but it was a New York Times bestseller. So there is, it had an audience. And I could see, I don't know what you, again, without having seen the movie, I guess, I don't know what you changed the title to that remotely evokes the original title, but is less clunky. Like, so for a lot of times when there are movies that we do based on books where they will change the title slightly by like dropping a word or two, or like just kind of tweaking slightly in a way that feels kind of punchier than maybe the book title was. I don't know how you would do that for this. I don't think there's a shortened, punchier version of the same title. You would just have to change the title entirely, and if you do that, you may lose out some of your built-in audience. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, maybe the concern is that if you make it something more generic and bland, like the Island War or something, like, you know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
Like something, come up with whatever clever, like kind of punchy historical drama title you can think of. It would be unrelated to what the name of the book is. Yeah. Probably. And if you did that, but if you don't want to do that, if you want to like just basically punch up the book's title, I can't imagine what you would do. Like, you could just call it the Guernsey Literary Society, but that's just as boring. Like, potato peel pie is at least like an interesting, quirky, like, what does that mean thing. And if you just make it the potato peel pie society, you're like, what? Like, I just don't know if there's a way to punch it up. So I think they were like, screw it, we're just going to leave it the same.
No, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I agree. It's still interesting to me. I bet there were a lot of conversations had about it.
That is a thing that I feel like was discussed a bajillion times and before this movie came out, was what the heck do we call this thing? I guarantee that, speaking of, the movie did have a long road to release. So in 2010, producer Paula Mazer announced that that a script based on the 2008 novel had been picked up by Fox 2000 Pictures, and at that time, several actresses were mentioned as potential cast members. They included Kate Winslet, Anne Hathaway, and Emily Blunt, obviously big stars of 2008 or 2010. Then in 2011, it was announced that Kenneth Branagh would direct the film, and in 2012, Kate Winslet was signed on to star as the lead, Juliet Ashton. But then, a few months later, filming got delayed because of scheduling conflicts. And in 2013, Kate Winslet and Kenneth Branagh both dropped out of the project. And then shortly thereafter, Michelle Dockery, who is most known for Downton Abbey, was offered the lead role, but she ended up declining it. The movie would then go into limbo for quite a few years before eventually Mike Newell would be signed on to direct in 2016, with Rosamund Pike rumored to be the lead in the film.
That makes sense.
Yes. But then finally, in October 2016, Lily James was confirmed as Juliet, the lead in the film. And the film finally entered pre-production in January of 2017, with filming set to start in the spring of that year. The film was actually not shot in Guernsey, even though there was a lot of talk about it from producers and stuff ahead of time about how they thought that would make the most sense, blah, blah, blah. And instead, they opted to primarily film in Clovelly in North Devon, as well as some of the other small towns and studios in the UK. But they did not film anything from what I was able to gather either in Guernsey or Jersey, which is right next to it. So, which I had never heard of Guernsey.
Me either.
I was aware of Jersey.
Yeah.
I knew Jersey existed. It's funny because I was like, I don't even know what Guernsey is. And then I looked, I was like, oh, it's a little island. And I was like, oh, it's like right next to Jersey. Why have I heard of Jersey and never heard of Guernsey? That's very strange. I know of Jersey because it pops up randomly quite a bit if you play the game GeoGuessr, where you get put on like a Google Maps, like Google Street View, and have to figure out where you are. Jersey, for whatever reason, pops up pretty regularly. I don't think I've ever been in Guernsey on there, but
I know that's interesting. I wonder if maybe Guernsey doesn't have a lot of the like historical looking
I don't know
places left.
I don't know. Getting to some reviews, because there was not a lot of production information about this one. Harry Windsor of The Hollywood Reporter gave the film a positive review, in particular praising Lily James, saying, quote, buoyed by a reliably appealing star turn from James, this handsome tearjerker mostly sidesteps the tweeness of its title to become, somehow, both an old-fashioned romance and a detective story trumpeting gender equality, end quote. Trevor Johnston of Radio Times gave the film 3 out of 5 stars and said, quote, it was moderately engrossing, and he praised the likable performances, particularly that of Penelope Wilton, who I think most people would recognize from Doctor Who, or at least maybe most of our audience. I believe she plays, is that who I'm thinking of? She was also in Downton Abbey, but I thought she was in Doctor. Am I crazy? Maybe she wasn't. Maybe I'm thinking of a different actress. Hold on. Give me 2 seconds. I have to know.
Yeah, I don't know who you're thinking of or who this person is.
I might just be thinking of a British person that looks like her. Let me back up and make sure, because I don't know the names of any British actors ever. No, she was. She's Harriet Jones in Doctor Who. That's right. She's the Prime Minister.
Yes,
I thought so.
yes.
I thought that was her. I was like, I think it's the Prime Minister that David Tennant is like, don't you look tired, or you look tired, or whatever. Anyways, we need to rewatch Doctor Who. Where did I believe him? Okay, Jeffrey McNabb of The Independent awarded the film 3 out of 5 stars as well, saying, quote, it's a jaunty and good-natured affair. Concluding, quote, the result is a film that, while perfectly enjoyable on its own terms, becomes every bit as cozy, nostalgic, and superficial as the title suggests it is going to be, end quote.
Well, I do love when things are jaunty.
Yes. Getting into a negative review here, Kevin Maurer of The Times gave it 1 star, called it, quote, an inept and disingenuous froth fest. And he criticized the lack of chemistry between Lily James and Michelle Huisman. Guy Lodge of Variety also gave it a negative review, criticizing the mystery, saying, quote, it's neither particularly intriguing nor, as the rather straightforward investigation unfolds, terribly surprising, end quote. And then also kind of more on the negative side, Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian gave it 2 out of 5 stars, calling it, quote, naive and a glutinous 40s period exercise in British rom-dram solemnity. And then finally, Wendy Ide of The Observer gave it 2 stars, saying, quote, even fans of the source novel might struggle with this photogenic but labored adaptation. She also called the casting hit or miss and said, quote, the plotting storytelling relies on large chunks of exposition, end quote. So mixed reviews, but overall positive. Like as I said earlier, it's got an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 65 on Metacritic. So it has more positive reviews than negative, but it kind of mixed-ish. Mixed to positive reviews. So there you go. Katie, where can people watch? Oh, wait, before we get to that, this is a patron request.
Yes. This is a patron request from Teresa Schwartz.
Who's that? I don't know.
AKA my mom.
Katie's mom. Yes. So fantastic. This one's for you. Katie, where can people watch the Potato Peel's Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society?
You can stream it with a subscription to Netflix.
Oh, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. I would have sworn up and down this had a theatrical release.
It did.
But
I said the budget or the block or the
it did in
box
Europe,
office.
I thought.
Oh, okay.
But not here.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the cast is like half of the cast of Downton Abbey. So.
Yeah, so it's on Netflix here in the US. If you're across the pond, I don't know. I couldn't find anything about whether
Is
it
it
got
just
like
playing
a
on a
home
loop
release of any
24/7 on
kind.
like BBC 8 or something? I don't know.
Sure, yeah, maybe probably. I don't
Sky
know.
1, Sky 12, whatever your networks are.
Just saying, like here, you're not gonna like find a copy of it at like your library.
No, most like, well, maybe you might luck out. It is a book. It's based on a book. I feel like a library would be more.
But
likely
I
to
don't
have
know
it.
if it got like a home video release here. I
Oh,
couldn't
I see
find
what you're
anything
saying.
about that.
Yeah,
but
maybe not.
maybe in England it did. I don't know.
I'm sure, yeah, probably.
Because it did get a theatrical release over there. It did not here.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, it should be interesting. I'm, I have not low expectations. I have like almost no expectations going in because I just don't know what.
Yeah, my bar is very even right now. I don't know anything about this
I know
other than
nothing
that
about
it's set in World War II.
Yeah.
So
I like Jessica Brown Findlay. Lily James is fine in most stuff I've seen her in. Jessica Brown Findlay is well, I don't know if she's she was in Downton Abbey, but we know her most. She was great in Harlots.
Yeah.
We actually stopped watching the show when she spoilers is not on stopped being on that show. But yeah, I really liked her in Harlots. And then Matthew Good is interesting usually. He's or not Matthew Good. Matthew Good is Ozymandias from the Watchmen movie, but Glenn Powell is fine usually. He played the astronaut, one of the guys who walked on the moon. I can't remember which one. Anyways, no, he played some astronaut. I don't know. Anyways, he's got an astronaut name, which is funny that he plays in it. Glenn Powell is like an American astronaut.
That's total astronaut name.
He played somebody in some astronaut movie. I can't remember, but I didn't see. He might have been in First Man. He might have played Alan. I don't know. Anyways, that's it. That's all we got for this one. Come back in 1 week time. We're talking about the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
watching movies,
and keep being awesome.